Before we open the files on one of the most bizarre and procedurally complex cases of the late Cold War, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden histories of espionage and the quiet battles fought in the shadows, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us dig deeper into the archives to bring you these stories. The unraveling of the Indigo Network, a cell of deep cover operatives that had successfully infiltrated the American logistics infrastructure for 6 years, did not begin with a satellite intercept. It did not start with a high-ranking defector walking into an embassy in Vienna, nor did it begin with a dramatic car chase through the streets of Berlin. It began with the drone of a dot matrix printer and a cup of lukewarm coffee in a windowless basement office in Washington, D.C. The date was October 14, 1983. The man staring at the printer was Arthur Vance. Vance was 28 years old, a junior auditor for the General Services Administration. He was not a spy hunter. He was not a federal agent. He was a man who cared deeply about columns, rows, and the reconciliation of accounts. His colleagues considered him dull. His supervisors considered him useful, provided he stayed in the basement. Vance was overseeing the migration of the Department of Transportation's payroll records from a manual filing system to a new automated mainframe database. It was a tedious, thankless task that involved cross-referencing thousands of employee ID numbers against active duty rosters. At 10:15 a.m., Vance flagged an anomaly. It was a discrepancy of $412.50. The system had automatically generated a bi-weekly paycheck for an employee named Elias Vane, listed as a logistics consultant for the Railway Maintenance Division. The computer had flagged the payment not because the amount was large, it was actually quite small for a consultant, but because of the routing number. The direct deposit was set to go into a credit union account that, according to the bank's return code, had been flagged for dormancy 6 months prior. In the world of 1983 payroll management, dormant accounts were a nuisance. They usually meant an employee had quit or transferred and forgotten to update their paperwork. Vance, following standard procedure, pulled the physical file for Elias Vane to find a phone number and correct the error. He walked to the rows of gray metal filing cabinets that lined the back wall of the office. He found the drawer marked VZ'd, slid it open, and thumbed through the manila folders. He found Vane's folder. It was thin. Inside, there was a standard W-4 form, a copy of a driver's license, and a contract agreement dated 1977. Vance noted the phone number and returned to his desk to make the call. He dialed. The line clicked, hissed, and then a recorded operator's voice informed him that the number was no longer in service. Most auditors would have simply frozen the payment and waited for the employee to complain. But Vance was possessed by a specific kind of bureaucratic stubbornness. He looked closer at the contract. Elias Vane was listed as a consultant for Project 88 Beta. Vance checked the master project list. Project 88 Beta had been closed in 1980. This was the mistake. It was a clerical echo, a zombie line item. For 3 years, the Department of Transportation had been paying Elias Vane $412.50 every 2 weeks for a project that no longer existed. That amounted to over $30,000 of wasted taxpayer money. Vance felt a flush of indignation. He didn't know he was pulling on a thread that was attached to the Kremlin. He just knew that his ledger didn't balance. He grabbed his coat and decided to drive to the address listed on Elias Vane's driver's license. He intended to ask for a refund. The address on the license was in a suburb of Maryland, a quiet neighborhood of brick row houses and erratic postal service. It was raining that Tuesday, a cold gray drizzle that turned the autumn leaves into a slick paste on the sidewalks. Vance drove his beat-up Ford sedan, the windshield wipers slapping out a rhythm that matched his irritation. He arrived at the address at noon, 472 Maplewood Drive. Vance parked and looked at the house. Or rather, he looked at where the house should have been. The numbers on the street jumped from 470 to 474. In between them was a narrow, overgrown alleyway that led to a detached garage belonging to the neighbor. There was no 472. Vance checked the file again. The handwriting on the 1977 form was neat, precise loops of blue ink. 472 Maplewood Drive. He got out of the car and walked to 470. He knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered, peering through the chain lock. Vance showed his GSA identification, which looked impressive enough to civilians, though it carried no real authority. "I'm looking for a Mr. Elias Vane," Vance said. "He lists his address as next door, but there is no next door." The woman frowned. "There's never been a 472. The city renumbered this block 10 years ago. That alley used to be a lot, but they split it between us and the Robinsons." "Has anyone ever received mail for that number?" Vance asked. "The postman knows," she said. "He puts the stray mail in the box at the corner. Sometimes people come by to pick it up. I don't pay it much mind." Vance walked to the corner. There was a community mailbox, a rusted metal contraption for general delivery. It was a relic of a time before door-to-door delivery was standardized in these older suburbs. Vance stood in the rain, looking at the box. His auditor's brain was shifting gears. This wasn't just a clerical error anymore. A non-existent house meant fraud. Someone had deliberately set up a phantom employee profile to siphon money from the government. $30,000 wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to prosecute. He drove back to D.C., but instead of going to his basement office, he went to the Department of Transportation's Internal Security Office. He expected to fill out a fraud report, hand it over to a board investigator, and go home. He was met by a man named Detective Miller, a liaison from the Inspector General's office. Miller was a heavy-set man with cigarette ash on his tie and a look of perpetual exhaustion. He listened to Vance's story without interrupting. "So," Miller said, leaning back in his chair, "you have a guy getting paid for a dead project, sending money to a dormant account, living at a house that doesn't exist." "That's correct," Vance said. "I want to authorize a stop payment and initiate a clawback of the funds." Miller stared at the photocopy of the driver's license Vance had brought. "Leave the file, Arthur. You did good. We'll handle the accounting." Vance left, feeling unsatisfied. He didn't know that Miller waited exactly 2 minutes after the door closed before picking up his secure phone line. Miller didn't call the police. He didn't call the bank. He dialed a number at the J. Edgar Hoover building. Miller recognized the pattern. He had seen it once before in a case involving a frantic naval officer. The phantom employee scam was often used by low-level embezzlers, yes. But the specific details, the use of a project code that had been classified before it was canceled, the specific credit union used, rang a different bell. Miller knew that Project 88 Beta hadn't just been a railway maintenance project. It had been a cover for transporting hazardous materials, sensitive materials. The FBI agent who answered the phone was part of the counterintelligence division. Miller said 5 words. "I think we have a bleeder." While Arthur Vance was driving back to his office, a man who called himself Elias Vane was sitting on a park bench in Alexandria, feeding pigeons. His real name was Nikolai Volkov. He was 45 years old, born in a city that was then called Leningrad. He had been in the United States for 14 years. He was a sleeper, a deep-cover operative whose primary mission was not to steal secrets, but to exist, to build a legend, to be ready. For the last 6 years, his legend had been Elias Vane, a boring, reliable logistician who consulted on railway timetables. It was the perfect cover. It gave him a reason to travel, a reason to be asking questions about infrastructure, and a reason to have a security clearance, albeit a low-level one. But Nikolai had made a mistake born of complacency. When Project 88 Beta ended, his handler, a man he knew only as Victor, had told him to dissolve the Vane Identities' financial ties. They were supposed to close the bank account and stop the invoices. But Nikolai had been greedy, not for himself, but for the operation. The extra money, the $412.50, was useful. It covered the operational costs of the safe house in Baltimore. It paid for the rental cars. It was gray money, untraceable cash that didn't come from Moscow and therefore couldn't be linked back to the embassy. So he had hacked the payroll request 3 years ago, burying the auto-renewal deep in the system code. He thought no one would notice a few $100s in a department that spent billions. But that morning, Nikolai had gone to the credit union to make a withdrawal, only to find the machine rejected his card. Contact issuer. The screen had blinked. He had walked into the branch, playing the role of the confused customer. The teller, a young woman with gum in her mouth, had told him, "Sir, there's a flag on this account. A code 4 from the GSA. They're auditing the source of funds. Nikolai had smiled, thanked her, said he would call his employer, and walked out. He did not run. He did not speed away. He drove 3 miles under the limit to a payphone outside a diner. He dialed a number that connected to an answering service for a plumbing company. He left a message. "The pipe has burst in the basement. I need a plumber at the Maplewood property." It was a distress signal. It meant financial cover blown, investigation imminent. Now, sitting on the bench, Nikolai felt the cold weight of the pistol in his shoulder holster. He wasn't afraid of the police. He was afraid of the carelessness. In the KGB, carelessness was a crime worse than treason. Treason was a choice. Carelessness was a weakness. He knew that a GSA audit was slow. He had time. Days, perhaps weeks, before they connected Elias Vane to the other names, to the network. He stood up, scaring the pigeons into the gray sky. He needed to clean the house. Not the fake house on Maplewood Drive, but the real apartment in Georgetown where he kept the records of the other 3 operatives he supported. He didn't know that the GSA auditor, the boring man with the glasses, had been faster than he anticipated. He didn't know that Agent Miller had already made the call, and he didn't know that a surveillance team was already pulling the records of every car that had parked near that credit union in the last hour. Special Agent Raymond Haynes was not a man who enjoyed puzzles. He enjoyed answers. Haynes was the lead investigator for the FBI's Washington Field Office Counterintelligence Squad. When the tip came in from Miller about the ghost employee, Haynes didn't see a payroll glitch. He saw a loose thread. Nobody creates a fake identity to steal $400 unless they're desperate or stupid, Haynes told his team. They were gathered in the bullpen, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of stale coffee. Or, unless the $400 is just the exhaust fumes of a much bigger engine. The investigation moved with terrifying speed, authorized under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. By Wednesday evening, 24 hours after Vance's discovery, the FBI had pulled the bank records for the credit union account. They found that Elias Vane never spent the money on rent or groceries. Every 2 weeks, the $412.50 was withdrawn in cash. But the account also received other deposits, irregular amounts, wire transfers from shell companies in Panama and Zurich. "This isn't embezzlement," Haynes said, circling the transfers on the whiteboard. "This is operational funding. This guy is a paymaster." They traced the license plate of the car Nikolai had used at the credit union. It was registered to a John P. Smith, another alias, obviously, at an address in Georgetown. "We don't move yet," Haynes ordered. "If he's a paymaster, he leads us to the others. If we grab him now, we get one guy and a charge of wire fraud. I want the whole cell." The team set up a static surveillance post across the street from the Georgetown apartment. They used a GSA van, ironically enough, disguised as a utility repair vehicle. Inside, agents monitored the apartment with telephoto lenses and directional microphones. Haynes sat in the van, watching the apartment window. The lights were on. A shadow moved across the blinds. "Subject is pacing," the agent on the scope said. "He's agitated." "He knows," Haynes murmured. "He knows the money stopped. He's waiting for instructions." The psychological pressure on a spy who knows he has been exposed is immense. Haynes counted on this. He knew that a panicked spy makes mistakes. They make calls they shouldn't make. They meet people they shouldn't meet. At 8:01 p.m., the front door of the apartment building opened. Nikolai stepped out. He was wearing a trench coat and carrying a briefcase. "Mobile 1, take him," Haynes radioed to the unmarked cars waiting down the block. "Loose tail. Don't burn it. If he heads to the airport, we take him. If he heads to the embassy, we take him. Anywhere else, we watch." Nikolai didn't go to the airport. He walked. He walked for 3 miles through the damp streets of D.C., stopping to look in shop windows, checking his reflection for tails. The FBI agents switched off, a ballet of surveillance that required perfect timing. Nikolai stopped at a bus stop on Wisconsin Avenue. He waited for a bus but didn't get on it. He let 3 buses pass. "He's signal loading," Haynes said. "He's telling someone he's at the location." Finally, a blue sedan pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a taxi, it was a diplomatic vehicle. The plates were red and white. Soviet Union. The car didn't stop. It slowed down just enough for the passenger window to roll down. An object was tossed out onto the wet sidewalk. The car sped away. Nikolai bent down and picked it up. It was a pack of cigarettes. "Did you get the plate?" Haynes barked. "Affirmative," the radio crackled. "Vehicle registers to the cultural attaché. That's KGB. Haynes smiled grimly. The payroll glitch had just confirmed a direct line to Moscow. The cigarette pack wasn't just trash. It was a message. Inside there would be instructions. Run, or hide, or destroy the evidence. "Stay with him," Haynes ordered. "Tonight is going to be a long night." Nikolai Volkov returned to his apartment, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He sat in his kitchen with the lights off, the street lamp outside casting long, prison bar shadows across the linoleum floor. He opened the cigarette pack. Inside, tucked between the foil and the cardboard, was a tiny strip of microfilm. He didn't need a reader to know what it said. It would be the coordinates for an extraction, the black route. But Nikolai was hesitating. The FBI didn't know about the depth of his integration. They thought he was a courier or a low-level observer. They didn't know that Elias Vane had spent the last 5 years altering the shipping manifests for the U.S. Atlantic Fleet. That was the true genius of the Indigo Network. They weren't stealing blueprints for lasers. They were messing with the paperwork. They were subtle saboteurs. A shipment of tank parts intended for West Germany would be routed to a warehouse in New Jersey due to a clerical error. A requisition form for jet fuel would be misplaced, grounding a squadron for 3 days. It was a war of attrition, fought with bureaucracy. And Nikolai was the architect. If he ran now, the network would collapse. The other operatives, Linda in the Naval Yard, Marcus in the Pentagon mailroom, and the one they called the librarian at the State Department, relied on him for their funding and their orders. He looked at the phone. He had a wife, Patricia. She was American. She knew nothing. She thought he was a logistics consultant with a gambling problem, the lie he used to explain his erratic finances and moods. She was visiting her mother in Ohio. If he defected, he would never see her again. If he ran to Moscow, she would be interrogated, perhaps charged as an accomplice. The cruelty of his profession washed over him. He had used her. He had used the American system's trust against itself, and he had been undone by a 41250 check. He made a decision. He would not run yet. He had to warn Linda. She was the most vulnerable. She was the one who altered the fuel manifests. He grabbed his coat again. He needed to make a brush pass, a quick physical exchange of information in a public place. He knew Linda's routine. She grocery shopped on Wednesday nights at the Safeway on Connecticut Avenue. He left the apartment. Outside, in the surveillance van, Agent Haynes sat up. He's moving again. He didn't pack a bag. He's not running. Where's he going? Let's ask him, Haynes whispered, though he knew they wouldn't speak to him until the cuffs were on. All units, stay close. If he meets anyone, I want photos of their face, their hands, and their shoes. The game of cat and mouse moved into the brightly lit aisles of a supermarket, a surreal backdrop for espionage. Nikolai pushed a cart, pretending to look at cereal boxes. He was sweating. He saw Linda. She was a woman in her late 30s, wearing a raincoat, looking tired. She was buying milk. Nikolai moved his cart down her aisle. He didn't look at her. As he passed, he reached for a box of oatmeal. He dropped it. It landed in her cart. "Oh, excuse me," he muttered, reaching to take it back. In that split second, as his hand brushed the rim of her cart, he slipped a folded piece of paper under her purse. It contained one word: burn. He retrieved the oatmeal. "Sorry about that." "No problem," Linda said, her voice steady, though her eyes widened slightly. She recognized him. She knew the protocol. Nikolai walked away. "Did you see that?" Haynes asked the team monitoring the video feed from the store's security cameras, which the FBI had tapped into. Contact confirmed. Male subject made a drop to the female subject. "We have a positive ID on the female." "Runner," Haynes said. "I want to know who she is before she checks out." The computer in the van hummed. Minutes later, the profile came up. Linda Karras, civilian contractor, Naval Supply Systems Command. "Bingo," Haynes said. "We just found the leak in the Navy." Chapter 6. The complexity of betrayal. By Thursday morning, the scope of the case had expanded exponentially. What began with Arthur Vance's payroll audit was now a multi-agency task force operation. Vance, however, was still in the dark. He sat in his basement office, staring at his computer screen. The system showed that the payment to Elias Vane had been stopped. The account was frozen. Job done. But Vance couldn't let it go. He was a creature of logic, and the logic didn't hold. Why had the internal security officer, Miller, taken the file and never called back? Why had a black sedan been parked outside the GSA building all morning? Vance decided to do something that was strictly outside his job description. He decided to audit the other consultants on the defunct Project 88 beta list. There were 4 other names: Marcus Reed, Sarah Jenkins, Robert Cole, Linda Karras. Vance typed in Linda Karras. Her payroll was active, but not from the GSA. She was being paid through a subcontractor that billed the Navy. Vance cross-referenced the billing codes. The subcontractor shared the same tax ID number as the company that had hired Elias Vane. Vance realized with a jolt of adrenaline that this wasn't just about one man. It was a ring. A coordinated effort to defraud the government using the same shell company structure. He picked up the phone to call Miller again. Miller. The voice answered, sounding even more tired than before. It's Vance, the auditor. I checked the other names on the project list. There's a woman, Linda Karras. She's receiving payments from the same source. There was a long silence on the line. Arthur, Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. Listen to me very carefully. Do not type any more names into that computer. Do not print anything. Do not leave your office. Why? Is she involved in the fraud? Arthur, stop. Just stay there. Someone is coming to get you. Am I in trouble? No. But you're swimming in shark-infested waters with a paper cut. Just wait. 20 minutes later, 2 men in suits walked into the basement. They didn't look like auditors. They showed Vance badges. FBI. Mr. Vance, please come with us. They took him to a secure room in the J. Edgar Hoover building. There he met Agent Haynes. You have a talent for patterns, Mr. Vance, Haynes said, pouring him a coffee. You've found in 24 hours what our counterintelligence algorithms missed for 5 years. Is this about the money? Vance asked, holding the styrofoam cup. No, Haynes said. The money is the least of it. You've uncovered a KGB logistical sabotage cell. Linda Karras isn't just a fraudster. She's been rerouting naval supplies. You found the thread that ties them all together. Vance sat in stunned silence. He was an accountant. He worried about decimal points. We need your help, Haynes continued. We know who they are, but we don't know how the money moves. The network is funded through these shell payments. We need you to map the entire financial structure. If we cut the money, we panic them. If we panic them, they run. And when they run, we catch them. You want me to audit Soviet spies? I want you to audit the hell out of them, Arthur. And so, Arthur Vance, the man who nobody noticed, became the most important weapon in the FBI's arsenal. He sat at a desk in the FBI bullpen, surrounded by stacks of seized bank records. He worked for 14 hours straight. He traced the wire transfers. He found the accounts for Marcus Reed and the librarian. He built a financial map of the Indigo network. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. Friday, October 17th. The takedown was scheduled for 0600 hours. The FBI had surveillance on all 4 targets: Nikolai Volkov in Georgetown, Linda Karras in Alexandria, Marcus Reed in Arlington, and the 4th man, the librarian, who turned out to be a mid-level archivist at the State Department named Samuel Thorne. The order was given: synchronized arrest. At Nikolai's apartment, the team didn't knock. They used a battering ram. The door splintered. Agents flooded the hallway, shouting, "Federal agents! Down! Down!" Nikolai was in the kitchen, drinking tea. He didn't reach for his gun. He simply set the cup down. He looked at the agents with a resignation that was almost peaceful. He knew the game was over. The 41250 had finally caught up with him. "Nikolai Volkov," Haynes said, entering the room. "You are under arrest for espionage and conspiracy against the United States." "My name is Elias Vane," Nikolai said automatically, the legend dying hard. Elias Vane died 3 years ago when his project was canceled, Haynes said. Get him out of here. Simultaneously, across the city, the other dominoes fell. Linda Karras was arrested in her driveway. She screamed, dropping her keys. Marcus Reed tried to run out the back door of his house but was tackled by a SWAT team in his garden. Samuel Thorne was arrested at his desk at the State Department, quietly handcuffed while his colleagues watched in shock. By 9 a.m., all 4 operatives were in custody. The Indigo network was dismantled. In the interrogation room, Haynes sat across from Nikolai. He placed a single piece of paper on the table. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a satellite photo. It was the payroll printout from the GSA. This is what got you, Haynes said. You were a ghost, Nikolai. You were perfect. But you got greedy. You kept the payroll active. Nikolai looked at the paper. He laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Capitalism, he said. It is always about the money. The trial was closed to the public. The evidence was classified. The damage the Indigo network had done was significant. Millions of dollars in misrouted supplies, years of logistical confusion, but it was stopped before it could become critical. Nikolai Volkov and his cell were sentenced to life in federal prison. They were eventually traded back to the Soviet Union in 1989, just before the wall fell, in exchange for 2 American pilots and a dissident poet. Arthur Vance went back to his basement office. He received a commendation, a framed certificate from the director of the FBI. He hung it next to his calendar. He continued to audit the Department of Transportation. He was meticulous. He was boring. But every time he saw a discrepancy, every time a number didn't add up, he checked it. He checked it twice, because he knew that sometimes a clerical error isn't just a mistake. Sometimes it's a crack in the world, and if you look through it, you can see the monsters hiding in the dark. The payroll glitch case remains a mandatory case study at the FBI Academy at Quantico. It teaches young agents a valuable lesson. You don't always need a gun to catch a spy. Sometimes all you need is a calculator. Chapter 9. The Interview. A few weeks after the arrests, Vance was debriefed. Did you ever feel in danger? The debriefing officer asked Vance. Vance adjusted his glasses. Danger? No, I was just worried about the ledger. You can't just have money floating around without an entry. It's untidy. The officer smiled. Untidy, that's one word for treason. Treason is messy, Vance agreed. Math is clean. That's why I like it. Chapter 10. The Wife. Patricia, Nikolai's wife, returned from Ohio to an empty apartment and a front door secured with police tape. She was interviewed for days. The FBI determined she truly knew nothing. She had lived with a ghost for a decade. She sat in the empty living room, looking at the spot where the television used to be. The FBI had taken everything for evidence. She found a note tucked into a cookbook in the kitchen, missed by the agents. It was in Nikolai's handwriting. Patricia, I am sorry. The business trip went wrong. I will not be coming back. The bank account in your name is clean. Use it. Forget me. She burned the note in the sink. She didn't cry. She felt a strange sense of relief. The man she lived with had always been distant, always looking over his shoulder. Now she knew why. She moved to Arizona a month later. She never spoke of Elias Vane again. Chapter 11. The Legacy of Project 88. Beta. The GSA overhauled its entire payroll system the following year. They implemented new checks and balances, automated flags for dormant accounts, and stricter verification for consultants. They called it the Vance Protocol. It was a small legacy, but an important one. It ensured that the United States government would never again accidentally fund its own enemies through a clerical oversight. Chapter 12. Conclusion. The Cold War was often fought with missiles and microphones, but it was sustained by money. The Indigo network fell not because of ideology, but because of a failure in accounting. It serves as a stark reminder that in any system, no matter how secretive or powerful, the weakest link is often the most mundane. Elias Vane, Nikolai Volkov, was a master spy. He fooled the CIA, the Navy, and the State Department, but he couldn't fool Arthur Vance and his dot matrix printer. And that perhaps is the most terrifying truth of all. We are all just one clerical error away from being exposed. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the archives. If you enjoyed this story of how a payroll mistake brought down a KGB cell, please hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from the Cold War.